Former President Donald Trump is facing a possible indictment in the January 6th investigation. The grand jury met today here in Washington. CBS News has learned the special counsel's office cited 3 federal statutes in its target letter to Trump. Possible charges against the former president include conspiracy to commit an offense or to defraud the government or to defraud the United States. He has also called the inquiry a witch hunt. CBS News Chief Election and Campaign Correspondent Robert Costa joins us now. Bob, good to see you. Thanks for being here. I know you've covered all of these investigations looming and to come. Give us a sense of what the scope of this particular investigation is. What exactly has Special Counsel Jack Smith been looking at in this case?
How much time do we have? I mean, this is so sprawling, Caitlin.
Yeah.
Talking to people close to this investigation who have participated in different ways, to leave it at that. Let's say for sourcing reasons, people were very familiar with how this is playing out. Think of this as a multi-front investigation. Whereas the classified records investigation of Trump is really about his conduct. It's about Mar-a-Lago. It's about documents he took back to his property. This is about so many different pressure points Trump was using to try to stay in power. And what we hear is that the special counsel is building a really sweeping case. What was he doing with the vice president, Mike Pence? And you spoke to one of his top aides today. What was he doing with the Justice Department? What about members of Congress? What about Republicans in the states? All of these levers of power Trump was pulling. And the question the special counsel is trying to answer is, did the then president of the United States have criminal intent to use the government's means or to use people to stay in power? And did he conspire? Did he have a criminal conspiracy to commit fraud against the United States? Now, why do I use the word fraud? Because that's at the crux here of what they're looking at. Was Trump told, which we know he was, by many of his lawyers, that if you repeat these claims about the election that are false and still move forward under the guise that this is accurate, you're at risk of being accused of committing fraud against the United States? Very serious.
Very serious indeed. And I'm glad that you laid it out that way, because I think when people are learning about a new indictment or the investigations continuing, and of course they're still interviewing some people here, it can be kind of confusing about what exactly we're looking at. And I've noticed, talking to Republican primary voters and potential caucus goers, that they are also kind of echoing Trump's language that this is political. And I'm curious, in your reporting, how the Trump campaign is responding, but also if what you make of the idea that this could provide an opening for Trump's rivals to go after him, and yet they are pretty tepid in trying and criticizing him on this issue. They've also been echoing his rhetoric on this as well. Why do you think that is?
Well, there is a jarring disconnect between the consequences Trump is facing legally and the consequences Trump is facing politically. He's facing very serious charges already on classified documents, and potentially here, criminal conspiracy against the United States to commit fraud, all of these other charges that are looming here on January 6th. It could put Trump potentially in prison. It could be a protracted legal process. But politically, his advisors tell me and others that they don't feel much political heat, because the voters, as you say, you've met with them in Iowa recently, in New Hampshire, they believe Trump's in the right, that he's a victim of some kind of establishment legally and politically, and they're not necessarily on the edge of their seats wondering which the next tidbit of information that's going to drop on Trump's conduct. They've internalized so much about Trump's behavior, about how he operated as president, that they're not alarmed by any new development. And so many of his rivals, as we see, are not really willing to take him on. Though it's interesting that Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, you heard, he was raising some questions about whether Trump was too idle on January 6th, not doing much on the day of the Capitol attack. That's interesting. It's a crack, but not necessarily a yawning gap.
Yeah, it's interesting, too, because he also was trying to make the point of, we need to move on. We don't need to look back. I'm the candidate that can look forward. And so you're right that there are kind of these subtle ways to talk to voters. But as long as they are agreeing with Trump in terms of how they perceive these investigations, remains to be seen.
It reminds me of how the Republicans historically handled Watergate. After Watergate happened and Nixon resigns in '74, no one really wanted to talk about it anymore. You didn't hear Ronald Reagan and Gerald Ford talk about Watergate a lot in 1976 when they were running. It was just something Republicans wanted to put on the shelf. Same with Bill Clinton's scandals in the 90s.
Yeah.
You didn't hear Democrats want to talk about them ad nauseum. And so politically, there's always an inclination to kind of move on, shoulder what has happened.
Yeah, and make this a contrast with the current president.